So today in the studio we have Frank Mugisha, the Executive Director of Sexual Minorities Uganda. How are you doing today, Frank?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
It's a
It's a
pleasure.
very nice evening in Kampala.
Oh yeah, why is that?
I mean, it's been very hot, and at least we have some rain today, so I think it calls for some celebration.
Yeah, but also something else calls for celebration. You know, there's a very important date coming up. You're remembering the life of David Kato. For those who don't know, could you please tell us some more about the life of David Kato?
So, for many people who do not know who David Kato was, first, officially, David Kato was the advocacy officer at Sexual Minorities Uganda. But to me, David Kato was a friend, a fellow LGBTQ plus activist in Uganda. David Kato was murdered 14 years ago. He was found at his house, beaten with a hammer on his head, and that is how he died.
Wow. Can you imagine the brutality of the people who did it? Were they ever found? Were the killers tried in a court?
As a community and as a friends of David Kato, we are not satisfied with the findings and the investigations. Number one, they were very quick. Then number two, we believe that David was murdered because of his work, because he was very vocal
Mm.
at that point, and also he had been receiving a lot of threats. By the way, some people don't know that by the time David was murdered, he sent me a message and he told me that his email had been hacked and that he was worried for his personal safety. And a few days later, he was murdered. In fact, when I received a phone call from journalists who were working with us on a film documentary here in Uganda, and they told me that David had been murdered, I was like, no, I think you're worried because his email had been hacked.
Mm.
They told me, no, I think he's been murdered. And so he had been receiving threats. He had been worried about these threats. We believe one, it was because of his work. Number two, because the LGBTQ community has been characterized as a community that is hated so much in Uganda. So homophobia can play a part of his murder. Number two, LGBT community has been characterized as one that has so much money. Thieves could murder him because they think he has money. Robbers who came to him and thought he had a lot of money, maybe he couldn't produce the money, then he was murdered. So there has been so much speculation,
Mm.
and we're not satisfied with the investigation. Yes, someone was arrested and someone was taken to jail for the murder, but as a community, we were never satisfied with the investigations at all.
That is terrible. That is absolutely terrible. And also, I did some research and I saw that his name was published in a newspaper among a list of gay Ugandans. What do you have to say about this?
At that time, many during that time, between 2005 and 2010, notorious newspapers, tabloids mostly, were publishing names of LGBTQ persons, those who are known and perceived to be. So you don't necessarily have to say I am LGBTQ, I'm gay or lesbian, but your name would get published in the newspaper. I know as a community what we would do, would rush on the streets to buy those newspapers off the streets so that we save people from being outed to their families. So this newspaper called the Rolling Stone uh, named people, pictures, their addresses, and there was a tagline, hang them, they are after our children. And David was murdered right after this newspaper published his picture on the front page of the newspaper. We later on sued the newspaper, and thankfully we were successful. The newspaper was shut down, and the judge mentioned that it is important to respect the privacy of every Ugandan, even if they are LGBTQ. And in fact, in that very ruling, the judge said you cannot name people who are perceived or who say they are homosexuals in a country where it is very hateful to be LGBTQ.
Yeah, completely. So, how has his legacy been honored after having suffered such a tragic loss of life? What have you done or the community done to honor his life?
There's been a few things we have done. First of all, I'm very thankful to the international community. When David was murdered, the international community stood with the Ugandan LGBT community strongly. We had prime ministers, secretaries of state, presidents all around the world speaking out
Wow.
and calling on Uganda to respect and protect LGBTQ persons.
Yes. So does this tie in with the event that you have coming up on Wednesday?
Yes. So many people around the world honored David's legacy in many different ways. There have been streets, there have been, university lectures, journals written about him, there have been roads named after him, buildings with his name on, different essays written, dissertations people have written about his life and legacy. But as a community from Uganda, what we've done is honor David Kato by having the David Kato Vision and Voice Award, which started immediately when he was murdered. The next year, we started this award. This award has been given to different activists around the world.
Wow.
Cambodia, DRC Congo, Turkey,
That's amazing.
uh, other parts of the world,
Yeah, yeah.
USA.
Wow.
And what we've done now, most recently, is we've decided to have a David Kato Memorial Lecture. Because the reason we came up with the lecture, David was also a teacher.
Oh.
He was a teacher. He used to teach. And so we decided the best way to honor his legacy is by having a lecture that speaks to the theme on certain ideas or areas that he was passionate about. So, for example, David really, really cared about safety and security for the LGBT community. He greatly cared so much about the mental health.
Mm.
So we pick areas, and every year we theme the lecture around what he cared about. So this year we are having a lecture, and it is on resiliency in the times we're in at this moment.
Yeah, it's very unprecedented times for the community around the world, especially within Uganda, not only with the upholding of the draconian law, but also with the suspension of critical aid to various members of the community. What can you tell us about the suspension of US aid and how it has affected people in Uganda?
It is very precarious times right now, I can say. And for us, we've been at the end of this struggle. This is not new to us. We've been attacked, vilified, we've been terrified as a community, but what we're facing right now is worse than ever. Number one, the US has suspended aid. The US is promoting conservative ideologies that have no equality and inclusion. And what is happening in a country like my country, Uganda, is that authoritarian governments, conservative politicians are promoting their hatred because of what the US is saying right now.
Yeah.
So the suspension of aid, number one, it has affected provision of healthy services. It has affected safety and protection. It has affected advocacy. So as a community, at this point, we are in open arms. We do not know what to do for once.
Do you think that there will be another country that is benevolent enough to replace the aid donated by US, or is it just figure out and fend for yourselves?
I believe so many countries, European countries, and other countries that care about human rights and health rights, will step in. But the US budget to human rights and marginalized communities has been so large,
Yeah.
it is very difficult to fill or match. But we can start from somewhere.
Yeah.
And I've been telling my colleagues ever since the US suspended aid or withheld aid, I told them this is the work we do. This is the work we do every day. We do it with no money. My organization is not heavily funded by the US or any other countries, but we do the work because advocacy, standing up and speaking up for human rights, at sometimes doesn't require funding.
Completely.
So we do. This is the work right now. This is the moment where every person in this world who cares about human rights, rule of law, should step up and speak up
Completely.
and reach out to communities, directly work with the communities. Let them tell you how you can help them. It doesn't need to be with money. It can be any kind of way how you can assist them, help them, and work with them.
I understand. So you mentioned your organization, and I'm sure there are many people who are unfamiliar with Sexual Minorities Uganda. But if you'd like to speak a bit about that, I'd love to know, what is SMUG Uganda?
Sexual Minorities Uganda is an organization that is actually not an organization, correct me, it is an ideology
Okay.
that was started 21 years ago by my colleagues and people who cared about the human rights of LGBTQ persons. So this ideology was defend, speak up, and support LGBTQ human rights. But unfortunately, in 2022, the government of Uganda shut us down.
Wow.
So after the government of Uganda shut us down, it became very difficult for us to do the much needed work of supporting communities. Remember, we support hundreds of LGBTQ persons who have been displaced, who have been chased away from home, who have been arrested, who have been violated on the streets, who need mental health support. And then we speak up, we do advocacy, and we do the much needed work of changing mindsets of Ugandans to accept LGBTQ persons. But all that, government of Uganda said, shut it down. Meanwhile, the government of Uganda was shutting down an organization that never existed, shutting down an ideology.
Yes.
So, smartly, SMUG International, which is based in America, stepped in, sort of come and say, well, we are in America, we can support you with the structural process as you do your work on the ground. So right now, majority of our support and funding supporting hundreds of people in Uganda is actually individual donations that come into SMUG International.
Yes, you must compel very many people all around the world with your stories for them to be able to do this. This is absolutely heartwarming. Yeah.
I mean, our stories, people like to listen to our stories. They are very difficult. Many people relate to what is happening to us in Uganda. But you know, what we speak in the media, what we tell, is only the tip of the iceberg. But beneath, we have so many stories that are heartbreaking, heartwarming, but there's also a lot of joy in our community. Every time I bring together LGBTQ persons and we meet at a house party or an event, or just meeting and speaking to each other, there's so much joy in this community that has been suppressed for a very long time.
Yeah. So what do you think is the reason for this suppression? Do you think the influence from evangelical Christian groups? Do you think it's a lack of education? Or do you think it's just ignorance? Why do you think that Uganda has such a problem when it comes to the rights of LGBTQ persons?
I'll tell you something. You know, I came out to my family at the age of 14. Yeah. And during that time, I was never worried that I'm going to get beaten on the streets. I was never worried that I'm going to get arrested. I was never worried that I am going to face a very strong draconian legislation. The only thing I worried about that moment was not being cool as a teenager
Yeah.
to fit in with my friends. And I was only worried about getting bad names in school because of being different,
Yeah.
which I could deal with both physically and mentally.
Yeah.
But right now, if a 14-year-old boy came out, they could get arrested
Yeah. It's
and get
criminalized.
subjected to a lot of cruel and inhuman treatment in
Yes.
police custody. That's what's happening right now.
Yes.
So I do not see too much hatred towards the LGBTQ plus community back then. I mean, I personally do not have much information about my own sexuality or LGBTQ persons.
Yes.
So I had to rely on the internet to find most of the information. And when I made friends, of course I learned more about my own sexuality, and also as a Catholic, faithful Christian person, I embraced it even more. But for a young person at this point who is Christian and Catholic and from a very conservative Ugandan family, they can't,
Yeah.
because there's too much fear, repression because of the law, what they read in the media, misinformation and disinformation, and majority of this is unfortunately spread by Christian evangelicals from the United States.
Yes.
They pay money to content creators. They work with our own politicians, religious leaders, and government officials
Wow.
to spread hatred. And for the first time, we've seen that hatred in terms of speech can actually manifest into actual violence. For instance, when my organization was shut down in 2022, I almost fled this country. I almost left Uganda because one, I was vilified.
Mm.
I could not leave my house because I was so scared. There was so much misinformation about me, where they paid people to go out in on social media and say I recruit children into homosexuality. People I've never met, people I don't know in my life, were paid to go make videos, go on WhatsApp groups and TikTok and say Frank recruited us into homosexuality. I didn't even know them. But later on, they came out and said we were paid. So you can see the influence of Western extreme American evangelicals is real in promoting this hatred in Uganda.
Completely. And that also ties in to the suspension of aid, because a lot of the people who are within the current government believe and support and peddle these ideas. They lobby towards the spread of misinformation and violence and hatred. So I find it very compelling that throughout your whole life you have dedicated yourself to creating safe spaces for gay people and all around the world. Which brings me to my next question. What is Icebreakers?
Interesting. So Icebreakers is a support group that I started when I was at university. And at some point, the idea was for me to keep my friends, really, because every space I was in as a young person at that point was very heteronormative.
Mm.
So you had to have conversations about girls with your friends or soccer, football. And I felt like, I mean, as a young person, I can't say I didn't like it, but I didn't fit in. And I felt like at some point I need to be in a space where I speak about my own sexuality and people who understand me. And so when I had made a few friends who were gay at that point, and so because I'd come out to my family, and when I came out to my family, I did not get the negative response that many of my colleagues have got. Yes, I went through conversion therapy, I was taken to church, I did so many things. And I trusted my family because I thought they were doing the right thing to me, because I trust them over anything. And so, but I was able to go through that and be who I was at that point. So I kept reaching out to my friends and telling them, you can come out.
Mm.
And so, in a way, I had this support group that was supporting young gay men, my age mates really, to come out to their friends and their families. Because I also did realize that at some point my friend had saved me in his phone as a girl, and I had a girl's name. And so I was like, why did you send me as a girl? He said, so in case you send any text messages that could be compromising in any way, so if anyone reads them, they'll think a girl is texting me.
Instead of a
So
man.
I felt like uh, we are worried and scared and paranoid about everything in our lives. Why don't we have a support group
Mm.
where at least we have that one space, even if it's 1 hour, where we are ourselves? And so I started Icebreakers as a very small support group, mostly for gay men
Mm.
coming out of the closet, and encouraging them and telling them, I did it like this with my family. I had to speak to someone I love the most in my family first, or I had to then uh, do it like this with the other family member. And so we're sharing
Mm.
and speaking to each other conversations. And later on, it became this hub or center that every person came to meet their friends. At some point I was traveling and I met this person who told me that they got married with their
Wow.
partner because of me. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, we met at Icebreakers.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
they could, because it also became a point where people can't meet in restaurants, they're scared, but they know this place, Icebreakers, where they can say, okay, we were going to go on a blind date, let's meet at Icebreakers. So they'll come and meet at Icebreakers as strangers. Then they text each other. They go, I'm here. I'm in a blue shirt. I'm in this shirt. Let's meet. Then they talk. And people did not only make relationships, but connections,
Yes.
meaningful connections. And I know very many people in Uganda who have made meaningful connections out of this support group that they started many years ago. Because I started Icebreakers in 2004 as a very young person. I wasn't even 20 yet
Wow.
when I started it, because I was always passionate about my sexuality, but I wanted to give out a part of me that helped me. I was like, I was able to support myself to come out. So I wanted to give out that part of me to other people and be very supportive in helping them come out as well.
That's amazing. I'm sure you have touched the lives of so many people you don't even know, people who have used the facilities that you have provided, and for that I'm amazed, frankly. Um, so, what is the future then of organizations like your own, but also for LGBTQ persons on the continent of Africa?
I'm very optimistic. Number one is because, unlike unpopular beliefs where people think that homosexuals are perverts who abuse children, or like our movement and our struggle is about recruiting young people and youngsters into homosexuality and starting a movement or an army. I don't know. They're, bizarre imaginations, but we are a very loving community
Mm.
that if someone gets into this community, they get to realize, oh my God, these are the best loving people, but also really very hardworking because of the stigma and discrimination we go through. Besides that, if I come back home to the Ugandan LGBTQ plus community, we're very resilient.
Mm.
We have suffered so much aggression from the anti-rights and anti-gay groups with extreme legislations, including a death penalty. Um, Many of my colleagues have been arrested. I've been arrested before. I've been in prison,
Wow.
and living through this trauma, getting disowned by your own family, your friends are disowning you. So the resilience from the community, the fact that we can still survive to death and be very resilient. I'm very optimistic that at some point we shall be very successful. And I can say that majority of the Ugandan conservative ideologies, one, are supported by Western countries.
Yeah.
The anti-gay legislation is supported by Western countries. So once the Western countries stop their own people from coming and spreading hatred, then hatred will reduce. Then number two, there are so many young people in Uganda. Uganda is about 16% under the age, rather, Uganda is about 50% under the age of 16. So you have many young people who are exposed to pop culture
Yes.
and who are exposed to the internet. Right now, there's artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah.
So, and also, I mean, the rate of unemployment is very high in this country. So young people are beginning to care less and less about people's sexuality. They care more about, being part of AI,
Mm.
being part of the best technology in the world,
Yes.
being part of the pop culture,
Yes.
being in the global village that we're in.
Wow.
So eventually you're going to see transformation from these very conservative ideologies to a more progressive society. And I believe when that moment comes,
Mm.
we will definitely get our rights.
Yeah.
And I know the laws, for example, this anti-gay legislation and the repressive laws that we have in Uganda, that will go. The biggest challenge is going to be changing the hearts and minds of people from the
Yeah.
damage that has been done by the anti-gay and anti-AIDS movement.
Wow. That is some very powerful stuff. So, with everything that you've seen, especially with your very close friend David Kato, have you ever considered leaving Uganda?
I mean, when David was murdered, I was actually in the United States of America. I was in New York, um, doing advocacy work, trying to find out why the extreme American evangelicals are spreading so much hatred. And many people told me, don't go back to Uganda, it's so dangerous. You should consider relocating either to the United States or any country. I had so many offers. But a few weeks later, I came back to Uganda and I have never considered to leave this country because I support very many members of the LGBT community. People reach out to me every day. They need my support. And many people ask me, what keeps you moving? And what keeps me moving really is the support I give to communities every day. I
Yeah.
receive messages from people who just want to talk, people who are in danger, people who want advice from my community here in Uganda. And so I've never considered. And many people have wondered for the last recent years, where am I best?
Yeah. Where are you?
that's
Where are you based?
that's a very interesting question. In fact, I even have like development partners and civil society where they see me here in meetings in Kampala. Like, Frank, where are you best? I'm like, I am best here in Uganda and I'm every day supporting my communities. Yes, I did have a fellowship with Columbia University, the School of Global Politics, in New York, 2023 and 2024. And this only lasted for a very short time. I was only at the university for 3 weeks each semester. So in a year, I would only be in New York for 3 weeks, an entire year. And most of the time, I would spend it here in Uganda. But because I'm more of a grassroots person,
Mm.
and more of someone who does advocacy one on one, changing mindsets, meeting with politicians, meeting with government officials, meeting with civil society, working with lawyers. Right now, for the last 1 week, I've been extensively working with lawyers to overturn the anti gay legislation because we are at the Supreme Court at this point.
Mm.
So I am fully based here in Uganda and I work with my communities every day and I'm here to support my community. I'm not planning on moving at any moment. So
Do you ever worry about threats on your life or persecution? Because, frankly, your existence is against the Constitution. Your existence is illegal.
I receive very many threats. Um, in 2022, I almost considered relocating out of this country because I was receiving so many death threats. because of the influence from the anti-rights and anti-gay movement that were paying uh, content creators on social media to say all this misinformation and disinformation about me. So I still get threats both on my phone. I get threats on my social media. I get threats everywhere. But I worry. I worry. I look over my shoulder all the time. But I've also, this has been a gradual process for me doing this advocacy and this kind of work. So I've also learned how to live because this is my country. I've always been here in this country, Uganda. So I know how to live here. I know how to protect myself. I know how to keep safe. I mean, I don't take my safety for granted. So there's so many things I've put in place to make sure that I keep safe. A lot of things. I have to do so many things to keep safe, to keep myself safe.
That is terrifying, but you know, the strength that you have surely will inspire others to not worry about themselves. So wonderful.
Thank you.
So do you have any concluding remarks that you want to leave the listeners with? You've told your story, you've told the story of David Kato. Is there anything that you want to say to the listeners out there?
I think for me, in my conclusion, is that Uganda is a very beautiful country, and I know many people, my friends, including LGBTQ persons who have been here, who love the country. They would like to come here, but when people see how the LGBTQ community is being treated, for example, the murder of my friend David Kato, who we are celebrating in this lecture, and all these anti-LGBTQ laws that are coming out of the country, people stay away. So it's affecting our tourism, it's affecting investment and our own image abroad. I have my friends, my nephews and nieces who live abroad. People frown upon them because they come from Uganda because of what we have in terms of our laws. So we don't want a country that is labeled as the most extreme anti-gay country in the world.
Yes.
I think that can be changed. And we should work towards that country that should be inclusive, diverse, and accepting of every person.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure many listeners around the world will resonate very deeply with your story, and we're honored to have you here. Thank you for everything.
Thank you very much.